Hey, I know you say you want your family to be Christians, you want your friends to be Christians, but let's just take a minute and step back and make sure we understand what it is that we're inviting people into, that we're inviting our people, our family into when we tell them, hey, we want you to be a Christian. We want you to be a disciple of Jesus. What is it we're inviting our friends into when we ask them the same question and invite them into the same thing? Because I think this is something that we don't hear about enough. And so let's walk through this. I'm just going to share with you some ideas, some thoughts, some different things to consider. Certainly don't have to agree with me. My goal in this is just to throw out some things that maybe you haven't thought about and consider those and see what you get out of it. So if you're ready, let's get started. Let me ask you, what are the favorite verses that you have on your fridge, that you have hanging around in your house, that your church may even have posted? Are they this one in Philippians 1, I think it's 29 through 30? Jesus says, you have been called not only to believe in Christ, but also to suffer for his sake. Or what about Philippians 3, 10 and 11, when Paul says, I want to know the power of his resurrection and to share in his sufferings? Or what about this one in 1 Timothy, 1 Timothy, or 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:12, when it says, those who live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Or let's get to what Jesus says. What about this? I'm just going to read it. It's a little bit longer. John 15, verses 18 through 21. And by the way, all the passages that I'm referring to here are listed down in the show notes, and the entire passage is in the show notes. Jesus said, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Jesus also says in Luke 14:33, he says, unless you renounce everything that you own, you can't be my disciple. Renounce, give up a claim to, give up a right to. Unless you renounce it for everything that you think you own, you can't be my disciple. Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, here's what it looks like. You got to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And then Jesus goes on to say in Luke 12, when he's talking to a bunch of people, he says, sell all you have, give the proceeds to the poor, and store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth can't get to and rust can't destroy, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is what you're calling people into when you're telling them, I want you to be a Christian, or I want you to be a disciple of Jesus. And people go, well, those verses don't really mean what it says, right? Oh, I can't sell everything I have and give it to the poor. How would I live? Well, I can't give up ownership to everything that I have, right? And so then they try to get in and they're like, well, let's look into the original language and see what it says. It can't really mean what it says. But here's my point. Have you ever heard anybody say that about John 3:16? You know the verse that says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Right? Nobody does that. Nobody says, well, that doesn't mean what it says, because we like that verse. It makes us feel good. So why do we take the difficult verses and try to make them mean something else? Because we don't like them, and they don't make us feel comfortable. So before wanting your family to get saved, let's make sure we know exactly what it is we're calling them into. And before we get into that, I just want to share something with you that'll help you a lot in this area, and I know it's helped me. What has helped me is being able to get what I call a Northstar for my life, a guiding vision or overall purpose for my life, and then I can orient everything about my life toward that vision. And so that's what I'm offering for men. It's a 5-day challenge, I'm calling it. It's one-on-one, just you and me, just you and or if you know somebody, let them know. It's just me and them, one-on-one on the phone for 5 days. The details are down below. It's $20, but the money doesn't come to me. There's 3 different organizations you can donate to. Donate to one of them. It'll explain how that works, and we'll get started. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you about that. Having a North Star or a vision or a purpose for your life that's overarching has been a great help to me, and I want to offer that to people. So let's get back to it. What exactly are you inviting your family and your friends into when you say, I want you to be a Christian or I want you to be a disciple of Jesus? Well, one thing we've seen is that we are calling them into, we are inviting them into suffering. Okay, suffering. And it even goes beyond that. When you get into Revelation 6, you find out that God has a certain number of people that have to be martyred or killed for following him, for his name, for being a believer or a disciple of Jesus before the world ends. And what I like to say to people is, you notice there's no exemption in there, as in you don't get to exempt yourself from possibly being one of those martyrs that have to be killed before the world ends. You don't get to exempt your spouse. You don't get to exempt your kids. You don't get to exempt your grandkids. What I'm getting at is when we ask and we invite our spouse, our kids, our family, our friends to become Christians, we are asking them to join an army that is in the middle of an active war where real bullets are flying and we're up against a very powerful and strategic enemy who will go to any length, pull out all the stops to win. And there are active bullets flying, spiritual bullets and also physical bullets flying. And one of those bullets may hit you or your spouse or your kids or your grandkids if they are Christians. And we have to be ready for that, and we have to make that clear to both the people that we're inviting to be Christians and to ourselves. In other words, Jesus told the story in Matthew 14, right? He said, he gave 2 examples, but both of them had the same point. And the point was, before you decide to follow me, Jesus said, you make sure that you are counting the cost and understand exactly what it is you're getting into. And I would extend that to say, before you invite people to be Christians, including your spouse, family, friends, make sure you know exactly what you're inviting them into and make that clear to them. So, what can you do about this? What are some simple or asimple, maybe action steps that you can take to make this more real and more solidified in your thinking so you can better explain it to other people? Well, I would suggest a few things. Number 1, read through the passages that we just talked about in the show notes. And I would suggest taking at least one of those passages and posting it somewhere where you can read it every day. Maybe 2 or 3 of those passages and read them every day. Maybe on the mirror in the bathroom, maybe somewhere in your car so you'll see it when you get in first thing in the morning, and before you leave you can read it. But to constantly remind you, hey, this is what I've joined. Okay? Another thing to do would be to share what you've learned with your family and with your friends and with other believers, other disciples of Jesus, because I don't think we talk about this enough. And ultimately, what you're trying to do by reading these passages and thinking about them, and hey, don't just take my word for this. Dig into the Bible. See what it says. See what Jesus taught. Ultimately, you're trying to come to the conclusion for yourself. Is Jesus worth it? Whatever it has to be or happens to be for you, is Jesus worth it? Because once you establish that Jesus is worth whatever it is, whatever the cost, including the life of you or your spouse or your kids or your grandkids, then I think you'll be able to more confidently arrange your life to live with the guiding overall purpose of glorifying